Good afternoon. Welcome to Session 2 of the CAEL PLA Process Mapping Sessions. I'd like to review the materials you're going to need during today's webinar. There's four main items. First, several copies of the blank process map that was sent out to you. Second, your relationship map from the first session with any additions or changes that you might have made after this session. Third, any notes that you might have on possible improvements as a result of what you learned from mapping your relationship map. And then last, the filled out assignment sheet that was sent out to you by CAEL. Some additional items that are going to be helpful to you are several blank sheets of paper, pencils, and some post-it notes. One last thing, we'll need some of you to volunteer copies of your process maps for Session 2. So at the end of this session, I'll post my email address and telephone number and request that some of you volunteer to send me copies of your maps prior to the next session. Today, we'll follow up on your work from last week and use your Session 1 output and your assignment to build your first draft of your PLA process map. In this session, we will first gather feedback from participants and also take any questions that you have on your PLA relationship map. Then discuss any disconnects that you've already been able to identify. Third, we're going to go through a step-by-step review of the instructions to build your PLA process map. As a part of that process, we'll review the steps to convert the relationship map to a process map. Then we'll review the steps to identify additional disconnects on the process map itself. And we'll review the steps to transfer the disconnects you identify on your process map to an analysis worksheet. We'll be sending you a copy of this analysis worksheet table after this session, but for now, just make notes on a blank sheet of paper. After this session, we'll do the majority of the workshop with you, spending time building your PLA process map step by step. Then we'll discuss the next steps and your assignments, and finally, we'll answer questions. However, we do encourage you to ask any questions during the session as they come up throughout the webinar. First, let's talk about your PLA relationship map. So how did it go for you? How did your reviews with your peers and colleagues go? Did you pick up any new information on how things are currently being done? And did you learn about some new goals the organization thinks are important to improve your PLA process? Last, were there any surprises as you reviewed this information with your organization? We do have a question from someone in the audience, or actually it's a comment and a suggestion. There's a feeling that 1 week between the first and second session wasn't sufficient time to get feedback from the organization because there's just a whole lot going on as it is currently the end of the semester. So we'll definitely take that in consideration for additional workshops. But I'd like to point out that we're trying to give you the tools and training to build your process maps and your improvement plans during this workshop. And you can certainly take as much time as you need back in your organization to go around and interview people. And we recognize that that's a fairly short period of time between the sessions. But thank you for that comment. Now, do you have any other questions that we can answer about the first session or the relationship mapping process? Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit more about disconnects. I referred to something in the last session called a dual level disconnect. A dual level disconnect is one that occurs at two different levels in your organization. If you recall, there are three levels of disconnects. There's organizational, process, and individual disconnects. With a dual level disconnect, you might identify a disconnect that's both at the organizational and at the individual level in your process, for example. In this case, we demonstrate that on the disconnect analysis chart by identifying all the levels the disconnect occurs at. We'll show you an example of this later. Just to make a simple chart on a piece of paper like the one on the screen for today, and we'll send you a worksheet after today's session. You can transfer your notes to the worksheet after you've collected additional disconnect information in your organization. An example of this might be that an individual needs tools or training in order to properly do their job. This is an individual disconnect. But at the same time, a leader in the organization has to make a decision to either set a policy on training or fund the tools or fund the training. That would be an organizational level disconnect. This leadership decision is then reflected in either authorized budget or may even be reflected in a written policy change so that it becomes codified in the organization's policies. Then the individual can be trained on the item that they need more information on in order to properly do their job in the PLA process. The important part of this is that you do identify a dual level disconnect, and then you need to reflect the solutions to that disconnect in multiple places in your analysis worksheet and action plan. These actions may be different, but will probably be related. So are there any questions about this? Now I want to turn to some basics on process maps. These are guidelines that will hopefully make your task a little easier. If you recall, a process map is a process flow diagram that's organized into a cross-functional view horizontally. In other words, the map is divided up into these horizontal rows, or as we sometimes call them, swim lanes, with each lane dedicated to a specific role, whether that is a department or a division or the title of an individual. Because there's so many little add-on processes or exceptions that might occur only once or twice a year, it's probably impossible to capture a totally complete process map picture. The idea that we want to stress here is that we're interested in the main flow of your PLA process, which we call the 90% path. We want to try to avoid any one-off or special exceptions on your map. If necessary, you can always do a separate map as an addendum for some complicated subroutines that are more than exceptions but not necessarily a part of the main flow. Or you may not even need to map these exceptions. You might just write them out as a narrative in notes or in a work instruction. If everything is treated as an exception and mapped in a process map, then there's no real true core process. And consider if you want to continue to operate in this manner or develop a standardized process. One of the benefits of doing a really clean process map and the improvement that goes with it, many times you can eliminate some of these subroutines because a lot of times the problem with them comes from the fact that people are doing the same process in different ways. In the end, it's really your judgment call on where to draw the lines on the level of detail in your map. A couple of comments on the process of learning to do process maps. I'd like to tell you that building a process map is an exact science and that your first map is going to be perfect. However, process mapping is more an art than a science. It involves thinking about the steps in a process in the order that they occur, plus some really good listening from those involved in the process in your organization. Then translating all this information into a process map. You'll get a really good map the first time if you follow these steps, but unless you already have some experience with mapping, it'll take some practice and several iterations to get your map to the point where it's going to be useful for you in improving your process. Please remember that for this workshop, our primary objective is to use the core process map to identify issues and problems that we call disconnects, and then to resolve these in order to permanently improve your PLA process in your organization. So the map in your case doesn't need to be perfectly reflect your exact process as long as your exploration helps you identify and resolve any disconnects, whether they're on the map or on a separate narrative sheet. We'll talk later about some other approaches and techniques to help you through this analysis. Are there any questions before we go to the actual workshop? Now let's quickly review the 7 basic steps of process mapping, and then we'll allow you to follow them in the workshop. First, transfer the roles from the relationship map to the swim lanes on the process map. You do this down the side of each lane on the process map template that we've sent to you. Second, list the primary steps of the process on a sheet of paper in the order that they occur. And this, you can get this from your relationship map. That will be helpful, and we'll talk about that and show you some examples. Third, you're going to list any significant decision points in the process, again on a sheet of paper. Next, you're going to actually start your process map by transferring the starting point oval, all your action boxes, all your decision diamonds, to the proper swim lanes on your process map, and then you're going to add your end point or end points. In the next step, you're going to draw the relationship arrows to connect all these boxes together, in other words, all these steps on your map. When you have multiple decision diamonds, be sure to include the ending routines and make sure all these decision arrows have multiple paths. Sometimes a decision diamond yes answer continues the process, and a no direction goes back to an earlier step that you need to repeat. Or in some cases, the no means that that process ends at that point. Now review your assignment and think about how you're going to add any improvements to your process map that you know are going to be important. Last, go through your process map and note any disconnects by marking them at the appropriate point on the map with numbered circles. Add this disconnect and their respective identification number to your analysis chart for later reference and problem solving. Before we go to the mapping now, are there any questions on these 7 steps? Now it's time for the workshop, but first, Stuart Benkert and Madison Dell from UT Chattanooga have a question. They're asking, should we include any type of petition process, or would this be included in an accompanying narrative? And I guess I need to ask what a petition process is. I'm guessing it would be like an appeal. And UT Chattanooga answered, yes, it is like an appeal. So that's a really good question and a good example. It could really go either way. I would ask you to think about whether an appeal is something that happens fairly regularly or something that it's a real exception. If it only happens once or twice a semester, then I would handle that as a written narrative and an exception. If it is something that occurs more regularly, then it could be an important path that you need to map out. If anything, it sounds like it could be a fairly simple loop out of a decision diamond. The answer might be no on the decision diamond to some question or in the process, and then you can have a second decision diamond that says student decides to file a petition question. If the answer is yes, then the process probably loops back to an earlier step, like meeting with a faculty advisor. If the answer is no, then the process may end right there. That's just an example. But again, a good question, and thank you. First, we want you to start with your blank process map template. You should also refer to your relationship map with the different identified key roles. First, transfer all the key roles from your relationship map to your process map. These would be the top headings of the boxes in the center part of your relationship map in the large box. We want you to use a separate swim lane for each of these roles. And we want you to organize the map so that your entry oval starting point should be at the top swim lane role on your map. We'll use the CAEL PLA example on slide 26 in the PowerPoint from the first session as a guide. Any questions? I'd like to add here, for any of those of you who use Microsoft Visio software, we can provide you with blank Visio templates to fill in using your Visio program. It's also possible to do process mapping in both Word and Excel, and I have seen examples of these, but I wouldn't be able to answer too many questions on that. I'm not as familiar with that as I am with Visio. Visio is a much more powerful tool for mapping. Now we're going to show you some of the visuals of step 1 And then you're going to work on your own map. So here is the blank template. Please note that you may place the title of each role in the blue boxes on the left side of the process map. Transfer the primary roles from your relationship map to the proper lanes on your process map. Here are some examples of roles from a PLA process map. You may want to use student as a description for those entering the PLA process, or you may use PLA applicant as a more general description. This might include individuals who are not yet even students. Since they play the role of customer, they should be near the top, if not the top row of the swim lane. Then proceed to list down the left side, one lane per role, and try to place the roles in the general order that your roles occur on your relationship map. So how is it going? How did it go? Any questions or comments? If not, we're now going to move to the next step. Next, we'll create some lists using blank sheets of paper. First, list the main action items from your relationship map on the sheets of paper and try to do this in the order that they occur. I know this might be a little bit difficult, but just do your best to do them in the order that they occur in the process. Note that in the right-hand margin of your worksheet, the roll from your process map that refers to the appropriate step. Here's what your action worksheet might look like. So how is it going? And how did it go for you? Any questions? If not, we're ready to move to the next step. Now we're going to make a second list. This time we're going to list any decision points or decision diamonds in your process. They'll be represented on your process map as the diamond shape that we talked about in the last session. So on a blank sheet of paper, list your decision points and think about the possible paths that come out of each decision point. Determine if the decision point is a yes or a no, or if not, what are the specific descriptions of the options for the actions coming out of a decision point. We want you to create an outline using this blank sheet of paper and describe the possible routes from each decision point and then the next step for each. This is basically like an outline, and it's a little bit different, but here's an example of a technique that may make this step a little easier. So how's it going? Any questions? How did this go for you? Now for the artistic part. This is when it starts to get fun. Here's some tips and suggestions as you start to draw your actual PLA process map. Some of you will be able to just start putting your process into the proper order on your map and flow the steps out. Others may have to do this in steps, and you may have to start over a couple of times. A couple of tips. You might want to use a pencil at this point on your process map, as you can more easily make changes and additions. You may also want to use post-it notes and move them around until you're comfortable with the flow and the order of the steps. But be sure to leave plenty of space on your first map. New ideas are going to occur to you, and you want to be able to add them later. Plus, you're going to need room for your decision diamonds. So first, transfer your different start, action, and endpoints onto the blank map in the proper swim lanes for the appropriate role. Then go back and add your different decision points. Now, you may have a list of decision diamonds on your list. When you actually transfer the information, you may discover there's some additional secondary decision diamonds that you need to add. So how's it going? Are there any questions? This is one of the toughest steps in the process, and so how did this go for you? Are there any questions? Now in step 5, we're going to connect the dots, so to speak, by adding your directional flow arrows. Some of you may have done this as you've mapped, and that's okay. Either way is okay. But if you're less experienced, it may be best to take it a step at a time. I see we have another question. Celeste Evans is asking if we'll be sending out this PowerPoint, and the answer is yes. Thanks for asking that, Celeste. It will come out shortly after this session. So go back through your map and check the flow step by step. And make sure each box is connected by a directional arrow coming into each action or decision box and then going out of each box to the next step in the flow. Decision diamonds will always have multiple arrows coming out. Sometimes multiple arrows can come out of or go into an action box, especially as a part of a loop process. The starting and ending ovals will be the only steps with a single arrow and direction, although there may be several different arrows that go into an ending oval. There's always an ending oval to designate the end of the process. Now here's a couple of examples. If you end a process out of a decision diamond with a no, you have a couple different options. You can either just designate that with the word end, with a small arrow coming out of the no branch of the decision diamond. Your other option is to actually draw an oval with the text end, and it really is your choice, whichever you feel more comfortable doing. So now, again, how is it going? How did this go for you? Any questions? So I see Ken Hansen from Vol State has a question. He's wondering if you will be able to access the materials for your review. And the answer to that question is yes. Ken is also wondering if there are any other collaborators, interested in discussing this outside of this forum. And in my experience, that's a really helpful practice, and I would encourage you all to continue to work on this together after the session in some kind of forum or collaboration. That is the point where you can really make a lot of progress by sharing ideas and solutions with each other. I know CAEL is always interested in helping you to continue helpful discussions like these after the webinars. Now, while all of this is fresh in your mind, let's take a few minutes to think about any problems or disconnects you might have already discovered. What you should have now is a very high-level process map of your current state, or what we call an as-is PLA process map. As you do this step, it's very tempting to want to start to problem solve. Try to resist this, as you're going to do a current state map first, and there's going to be plenty of time for solutions later. If you try to incorporate solutions now, it can get very confusing. However, after you have the main flow of the PLA process map, it might be a good idea or a good time to at least make a list of problems to be fixed or improvements that you may think might be helpful. List all your disconnects out on a blank sheet of paper and number each one consecutively. Don't try to map any improvements yet. Rather, use this to prepare your thinking for the next steps on the disconnects. Review your page 2 assignment sheet provided by CAEL. Think about the places you would like to make improvements. Note these ideas at the appropriate place on your process map. Discuss these ideas when reviewing your process map with colleagues in your organization. This process map depicts your as-is or your current state PLA process. Your notes will describe any improvements you want to draw into your future state or should-be PLA process map. So how's it going? If you end a process out of a decision diamond with a no, you can either just designate that with the word end or a small arrow coming out of the branch of the decision diamond. And your other option is to draw that oval with the text end. Again, it's your choice. How did it go? Are there any questions? Catherine Woods responded that they did not have the previous webinar PowerPoint, and today was a challenge for them. She says that having gone over the PLA process training initially over the last year, they're familiar with how to plan or process this information. But while they didn't use this type of approach, they have a process in place which they think that they can transfer to the template. So she added there are always areas that require thinking and updating. And I see that Marianne Rainey has just added some links to the chat box to the PLA process definition worksheet and the relationship map at the THEC site from the previous session. So you can go to there to download those. She also added that additional documents from the webinar will appear on this THEC website by the end of the week, and you can go there to find other materials you may have missed. So thanks, Catherine and Marianne. At this point, you're almost done with your current state as is PLA map. Now it's time to go out and list all your disconnects and prepare yourself for session 3 and your new and improved PLA process map drawing. This is also referred to as the should be process map, the map you'll be doing in the future. In step 6, you listed your different disconnects on a sheet of paper. Now we want you to place these disconnects on your PLA process map and identify each by the number you assign to it. Draw a small circle around the number in the position on the process map where the disconnect occurs. And it is possible for the same disconnect to occur in 2 or more places, so you may place those as many places as necessary. Right. So now transfer these numbered disconnects to the blank sheet of paper using a similar format as you see on the screen, and add a complete description of the nature of the disconnect on the analysis chart. The description should be complete enough for you and your colleagues to determine an action and resolution to the problem. Identify the types of disconnects in the appropriate column on the chart. Again, O for organizational, P for process, and I for individual. And remember, some disconnects may occur at multiple levels. Next, go back to your organization and interview people in the key roles to identify any additional disconnects and to confirm the levels that they occur at. Once you have a final list, you'll transfer all the information to the formal analysis sheet that we'll send out to you after today's session. So how is it going for you? And how did it go? Are there any questions? Okay, if not, we'll move to the next session. And now we're going to talk about the next workshop and how you're going to prepare back at your organization for the final webinar session. You will be sent out some more materials and a link to the video reviewing this workshop. Do as clean and clear a version of your process map as you can. Don't put any improvements onto the map yet. And then take your PLA process map and disconnect analysis sheet back to your organization. Review your process map and your disconnect analysis with your colleagues and talk about improvements. Make notes on your potential improvements. Using the feedback and your notes, start to redraw your process map, incorporating improvements and solutions into your second draft. This is the beginning of your future state or should be PLA process map. Refine your disconnects on your map and transfer your final notes to the process analysis sheet. Correct and finish the categorization of the level for each disconnect on your worksheet. This is going to be critical to help you develop written action plans to complete the improvements on your PLA process. Now for any overall questions and comments. We did have a question from offline. The question was, is CAEL available to help us with this after the sessions are over? And the answer from Wilson and Joel is a definite yes. CAEL wants to continue to support your efforts in improving your PLA process. Please talk to Wilson Finch about any of this for more information. So I didn't put my telephone number on this slide along with my email address, but if anyone who's volunteering and would like to call me with questions about PLA process that we'll use in session 3, I'd be happy to answer questions. You can see my telephone number in the chat box on the far right. So, do we have any volunteers now to provide us with copies of their PLA process maps after today for session 3? If not, we may be following up with some of you to ask for some volunteers. We do need 4 to 5 examples to really provide a rich workshop experience. And I'm going to need these maps by the end of your workday on Tuesday, April 21st in order to get them into the PowerPoint slide session for session 3 on April 22nd. They will be put up on the screen in session 3, and we'll ask you to briefly describe how the process worked for you and any highlights about your map, and would you like to point anything else out. Then we'll take questions from the rest of the group and have discussion. Because we know all of you are interested in the peers that are attending these sessions and who you might want to contact, we've posted a list on the screen, and we'll leave it here for several minutes at the end of the workshop so you can view all the attendees of session 2. You can pause the video version and you'll be able to write down any names and email address or contact information. We want to thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to our session 3 workshop next week.